Hey everyone, Goddess Nadine here, and today I want to talk to you about how we don't know what we don't know. And to illustrate this, I'm going to tell you a little bit story of one of my prior relationships, and um, it was in fact somewhat of a toxic relationship. I mean, at the time, I didn't think it was that bad, but looking back, of course, it was pretty terrible. We had some of the worst fights that I've ever had in a relationship in my life. We also had some of the best times together that I'd ever had in a relationship in my life. So, at the time I was like, well, it balances out. But no, it doesn't, because I didn't know what I didn't know. So, he actually had some insight into his own psyche, and he asked me at least twice, like, why do you react the way that you react? Well, let me tell you, let me lay the stage for you. When we would fight, he was always really good about trying to end the fight. He would pick me up, he'd hold me, he'd cuddle me, he'd tell me all the things that he did that showed me he loved me, and I would fight him on that. And he asked me, like, why do you react that way? And I was like, well, anybody would react that way. I mean, you said this or this happened, and, blah, 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 this other thing led to this. Of course I'm upset, right? This is one of the key to recognizing when you don't know what you don't know is when you're thinking, well, anybody would, or this is completely normal and acceptable. No, it wasn't, right? When he was picking me up and cuddling me and telling me all the things that he did that showed me he loved me, I could have chosen to stop being upset in that moment and appreciate him for being with me and loving me. Now, he wasn't just doing that out of kindness and love, though, because he had a pattern as well, which he was at least aware of and expressed to me multiple times. But at the time, again, with me, with my huge blind spot, I didn't even understand why he was telling me what he was telling me. So what he would tell me is, he was brutally abused as a child. And so anytime there was emotional upset or an argument or he was in trouble, well, he perceived my upset as him being in trouble, then his first instinct is to rush in and try to defuse the situation by showing that he's actually a good guy, right? Like, hey, I'm a good guy, don't hurt me, is what he was saying. And me, I didn't recognize my own pattern and how it conflict, we had perfect matching conflict patterns. They just locked together so perfectly. My pattern, I didn't even realize until about 6 months after the breakup, after doing tons of soul searching and reading relationship books and trying to figure out what went wrong, because I was heartbroken. He was heartbroken. We were both heartbroken about our breakup, and it was the stupidest breakup ever. That's a whole nother story. But it wasn't until I absorbed all this different information about relationships and communication and stuff that I hadn't known before, all of a sudden one night it clicked in my head. And I'm like, oh my God, that's what was going on? Wow. So my story and what had created my conflict pattern was my parents, first off, they had a rule not to fight in front of the kids. So I never saw my parents have conflict. I never saw my parents resolve conflict because whatever they did behind closed doors. I heard raised voices from behind closed doors once in my life, in my childhood, that I recall. And one other time when we were driving, my dad was driving, my mom was being the navigator, and they were doing that kind of sexist bickering of, my dad being all, I know where I'm going, and my mom saying, but didn't we have to turn back there? That's it, right? For the first 9, almost 10 years of my life, did not see my parents fight at all. I had a pretty idyllic childhood, I thought. I was 9 going on 10 when they separated, 10 when they divorced. We had counseling as children. The counselor, I guess I absorbed this idea from something, either the counselor or my mom or somebody said, was I had this belief that since I was 10, I was old enough to understand that my parents' divorce wasn't about me, which was true. So I thought most of my life that I was not affected by their divorce. But when I discovered my conflict pattern, I realized that their divorce had affected me because of what happened between them. So they're modeling their behaviors toward each other. And after they divorced, it was a constant battle for custody of us kids, ongoing. My little brother was 4 when they divorced, and this went on till he was 16. So 12 years of fighting between my parents over us kids, through us kids. So one parent, my dad would say, your mom's crazy and you need to, I want you kids to be safe, so you need to vote for me when we go to court, right? Like tell them that you want to live with your dad. My mom would be saying, well, your dad's abusive and I'm afraid for you kids, and I want you to be safe, so you need to vote for me. Tell the judge that you want to live with me. 12 freaking years of this. Now, I didn't let it get to me for 12 years, at least not consciously. At age 15, I told both of my parents that I was sick of hearing about each other from each other, and that they should only tell me about themselves. And my dad respected that. My mom, not so much. And this is nothing against my mom. Looking back, she was traumatized prior to marriage, and I'm sure that my dad probably was in some way. We have cycles of trauma and abuse and recovery in our culture. So I'm not blaming my parents for what happened, but what I am saying is, because of this conflict, and what was their conflict? Who is the better parent? So because of this conflict, when my lover would hold me and cuddle me and try to comfort me by telling me all the ways that he cared, all the things that he did that showed me he loved me, I was reacting unconsciously to that as if he was saying, I'm the better partner in this relationship. You don't have a right to be upset. Whereas he was like, hey, I'm a good guy, don't hurt me. I was like, what do you mean you're the better partner? I do have a right to be upset. This happened and that happened, and anybody would be upset about that. So I was fighting for the validation of my feelings, for the validation of, the communication that I was trying to get across of whatever it was that I felt needed to be corrected in our relationship or in our home. Most of our fights were about really stupid shit like house cleaning, right? And that may seem stupid. It's definitely stupid looking back at it, but at the time, it was vital, right? Like, I am a very clean and neat person. He's a slob. My current partner, also a slob, but before we moved in together, we established some boundaries about that. And he respects those boundaries. He helps me clean up the kitchen when we cook together. He keeps his mess confined to his room. And yes, we have our own rooms. So things are a lot different now. But back then, man, I didn't know what was going on, right? I thought I was the reasonable person. He thought he was the reasonable person. At least he had some self-insight to know why he reacted that way. And if I hadn't had the conflict pattern that I had, that way probably would have worked pretty well. But they say that you attract the partners that you need. And that is really one of the biggest lessons I learned from that, is to start being more aware of what I don't know and trying to resolve those things personally within myself rather than through another person or through a relationship. My current relationship has been fantastic. We've been together 7.5 years at this point, since early 2014, April 2014. And unlike any relationship I've ever had in the past, we have not had one single fight. We've had disagreements, sure. There are times when we don't necessarily agree with each other's perspective or point of view, but it has never led to a fight. We've always been able to just talk about it, accept each other even if we don't agree, and move on and just love each other. And a lot of that is due to me doing the self-work and him doing his own self-work before we met. And being able to communicate effectively and just being open to each other and accepting each other for who we are and loving each other. So if that's one thing I can recommend, if you're experiencing conflict with anybody, regardless of the causes of that conflict, start examining yourself and what you might not actually know. And let the other person, that's their job, right? They need to do that on themselves. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. That's not your job to control that. So let other people be as they are. And if you can't accept them as they are in your life, then you may need to part ways. Sometimes these happen. But we can't fight and we can't force each other to conform to our idea of what's true, when our idea of what's true may be completely wrong or completely off base.